Hey, what's up, fellas? How you doing, man? Antonelli here.
Hey, what's going on, guys? How we doing? Matt Antonelli here. Today we're talking about, have I ever been booed during a game, and just in general, how much can you actually hear that's coming from the crowd when you're playing? So we're going to get into that today. Before we do, today's video is sponsored by Rocket Sports. Rocket makes top quality baseball equipment. We use a ton of their stuff with our Antonelli baseball teams. Go and check them out. Go to the description box below. Click the link there. It's going to take you over to their site. You're going to be able to get 15% off of your order at Rocket. So go and check that out. Okay. So we're going to talk about, first again, have I been booed before? Yes, I actually have. We're going to talk about that story. And then let's just talk about first, how much can you actually hear when you're playing on the field coming from the crowd, all right? The first thing is it depends on how big the crowd is. Now, it's actually probably the reverse of what most people think. The bigger the crowd, the less you actually hear from them. When there's not a lot of people in the crowd, you can hear every little individual thing, okay? When there's a lot of people, you kind of just hear, it's like almost like white noise. You hear this, but you can't really make out what like individual people are saying. And so it depends on what level you're at. Now, if you play, let's say in high school, right, you can usually hear everything because there's just not a lot of people in the crowd. Now, typically in high school, you're not going to have any hecklers. You're not going to have anybody screaming at you. So you don't really have to worry about it too much in high school. Now, when you get to college, the crowds get bigger, right? And so when I would play at places like UNC Chapel Hill or Florida State or Clemson, I mean, there's a lot of people there. And so you don't hear really as much. You can hear the crowd scream at you, right? Or if you make an error, right? You make an error, you can hear everybody cheering, but you don't typically hear those one or two people screaming at you. Now, at NC State, you kind of did, because at NC State, they have this, the student section is like right next to third base. And I played third base, and I could really hear them. I played one of my worst defensive games there. And I had really long hair. They called me screaming Goldilocks the whole game. And then, like, every time I missed a ball, they'd be screaming at me. I could hear everything. They looked at our, like, Facebooks back then and would find, like, your girlfriend's name and be screaming that at you. So that was one time where I really did hear them yelling at me pretty good. But again, in general, when you play at pretty big stadiums with a lot of people, you don't hear it. Now, you move up into the minor leagues. Now, in the minor leagues, it really depends on where you're playing. I mean, you could play at a low level and have a ton of people. You could play at a high level and have nobody. It really depends. Like when we played at Syracuse, when I was in Syracuse, I mean, there were really barely anyone in the crowd. Like, not many people came to the games in Syracuse. And that's AAA, right? One step away from the big leagues. And you'd hear this one guy. I forget his name. He was very well known, though. And he would just rip on everybody on the opposing team. Like, literally just destroy them verbally. And he was brutal. But you could hear him because there was no one else there. It was like him, and his voice would just echo throughout the entire stadium, okay? And then in the big leagues, obviously in the big leagues, you can't really hear much at all. It's just you get that white noise kind of effect again. You'll hear people, like when I made an error against Milwaukee, you guys saw that. The crowd just goes ballistic, but you can't hear anyone being like, "Hey, nice throw, you idiot, you suck." Like you can't hear any of that stuff. You just hear the noise. And then maybe the worst is when you're at home and you make a mistake and you hear like this disappointing, like, "Oh." You hear everybody in the stadium do that at the same time is one of the worst feelings in the world. So you can definitely hear that. Okay, now let's talk about more of individual stuff, okay? The one time I was booed was actually not as a professional player. It was in the Cape Cod League. So Cape Cod League is a collegiate summer league. It's typically for usually the top players in college baseball. I mean, most of the guys in the Cape Cod League get drafted. A lot of them get drafted high. And so, my years in the Cape, I had guys like Jacoby Ellsbury was on my team at Cliff Pennington. And, there's tons of really good players. Evan Longoria was on Chatham, and Daniel Bard and Andrew Miller and Tim Lincecum. And basically, like, almost the entire first round of collegiate players are all playing in the Cape, top bunch of rounds. And so it's Chad Huffman was on my team. Who's what was Chad? A second round pick with the Padres? Sorry, my nose is itching right now. And so we're playing there. Now, keep in mind, I'm from just north of Boston, so I'm a local player. And people in the Cape really like their local players, right? Because you get players from all over the country. There's not a lot of players that come from Massachusetts and play. And so a lot of people knew, my home, the Falmouth fans, the people watching the game, knew that I was a local player. And my first home game ever, I'll never forget this. First time ever playing, freshman year in college. First home game at Falmouth. I'm playing shortstop. Now, I haven't played shortstop since high school. Let's see. Well, no, that was my freshman year. So it's been about a year since I played shortstop. I played all third base at Wake Forest my freshman year. And our shortstop wasn't there yet. So they said, can you play short? And I was like, yeah, sure thing. So I went over to short. And I made 2 errors, 2 big errors that game. It was pretty bad. One ball, I think, went through my legs. One ball bounced up. And then the third one, they didn't give me an error on, but this is when they started to boo me. There was a ground ball hit kind of in between me and another defender. We're both coming to get it, and it was my ball. I'm the shortstop. I should have just come across and taken it. And I got right up to it, and I could feel him coming over, and I kind of slowed down and looked at him, and then he slowed and looked at me, and then the ball just kind of went through both of us, and they booed. They booed pretty loud, and it was pretty bad. Boo! Like, you could really feel it. And then as I'm running off the field, somebody screamed, "Why don't you go back to Peabody?" That's where I'm from, not a little town, but a city called Peabody. And so that was my first home game at the Cape. I got booed, and then I got screamed that they go back to Peabody. And luckily for me, I ended up turning it around. They put me back at third. I ended up making the All-Star team, and I think I led the team. I believe I led the team in, well, I might not have led the team in hitting. I was right around it. Daniel Card, another player on our team, ended up winning the MVP of the league, but I had a really, really good year, and I guess I turned out to be like a fan favorite, I guess, because a local guy, and I mad the All-Star team both times I played there. But it didn't start very well, okay? I got really booed very loudly and was told to go home, and that was pretty bad. Now, the other times in the minor leagues, here's another thing to keep in mind, is when you're doing really poorly, that's when you hear people the most. Like, when you're doing well. Now, first of all, I guess when you're doing well, you're not going to get screamed at a lot, but you still will. Like, people on the road especially will still yell at you. But when you're doing well, you, don't really hear anything. Like, I get in the box, and if I'm feeling really good and I'm hitting the ball really well, people are screaming, but it's like the movie for the Love of the Game when he goes into that, mode where everything gets really quiet. That's kind of the mode you're in when things are going well. When you're not doing well, when you're struggling, it's like you can't get into that mode, and you hear every little tiny thing. And it's really rough. When I was struggling in 2008 in AAA and I wasn't hitting well, every time I got into the box, almost whether I was home or away, but really when we were away on the road, my stats would come up on the board, and it would say, hitting, 180 something. And every time you get in, and once it comes up, all of a sudden, "Hey, nice average, 186. And you just start hearing that. Guy can't even hit his weight. And then you're in there, and you just hear everybody screaming at you every single pitch, and you can't get into the mode. And it's brutal. I guess another thing, again, when you're doing well and you get in there, they're not going to scream nice 330 average. Yeah, thank you. I know, I appreciate that. They're not going to scream that. They might say things like you're ugly and stuff. But again, you're well, screw you. I'm hitting 330. I really don't care what I look like. So I guess that has something to do with it too. But it does really sting a little bit, or a lot, when you can hear individuals screaming at you. And so it's always nicer to kind of play in big stadiums with lots of people, because then you don't hear those individual screams. Unless the other time you get yelled at a little bit is on the on-deck circle. I remember at Dodger Stadium, right? You're sitting, the fans are right there. You're on the on-deck circle. The guy's head's right behind you. And I tried to be pretty nice. I actually turned a lot of people into my fans. I remember at Dodger Stadium, I'd get in the on-deck circle, and they'd start yelling at you, nice average, whatever. And then I would just just talk with them and say, "Hey, thanks, I really appreciate that, man." And then we'd start talking, and then the next time I come out, they'd be like, "Dude, you're my favorite player." So most people are pretty good if you just talk with them. But there are some people that are pretty ruthless. So that's kind of how it goes with booing and what you can hear in the stands. My other story, I'll tell you the one more. You guys have all heard this, so I haven't told this in this video, but when I first got drafted by the Padres, first round pick, and I'm walking up to the first home game in Eugene, I'm walking up to hit, and this lady stands up and she screams, "Come on, Matt! You gotta start earning some of that money. She screams it at me. I know most of you have already heard this story before, but that was the first time when I was like, holy Jesus, like I'm gonna get bombarded this year with people screaming at me, and I haven't even done anything yet. I literally, like, it was the first home game. I just got there, and she's screaming that I gotta start earning my money already. But I appreciate you doing that, because now I have that story to tell, and my buddy Whey LeBlanc, who's still playing, I don't know how, he's still playing. He's like 47. No, he's not 47. I'm 34. He's like 35 years old. I think he just turned 35. I think his birthday's in August or something. I should know that. But he always, for then on, anytime something would happen with anything, he'd say, come on, Matt, got to start earning some of that money. He does it better than I do. But that lady, too, stuck out. Because, well, she screamed at the top of her lungs, and she screamed that when I was walking, I was literally like, she was right there, and I was just starting to walk up to home plate. So that's the fun of being a professional player or a college player at a decent-sized program and getting screamed at all the time. Fun when you're doing well, not so fun when you stink. And unfortunately, I stunk a couple of years, which made it pretty tough on me. So thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Give it a thumbs up. I'd appreciate that. Share with all your friends. Subscribe to the channel. Comment in the section below. And we'll talk to you later.